When you think of pop culture icons like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Tupac Shakur, Mark Twain, and Nelson Mandela, the first things that probably come to mind are physicist, peaceful activist, musician, author, and beloved politician. What likely doesn't come to mind are labels like socialist, anti-capitalist, communist, anti-imperialist, or freedom fighter willing to take up arms. Why is that?
Sounds dramatic, right? But this is exactly how radicalization works. We can take a look at his playbook here and you can see text names everyone respects. Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and you attach radical labels to them. Now, I came across this video on YouTube by a self-proclaimed left-wing content creator called Overzealots. A lot of his content revolves around defending socialism and making cultural critiques, but this video stood out to me. Not just for what it says, but for how it's framed. From the very start, you can see how he pushes his audience to be radicalized in one specific direction. For one, the title immediately stands out, Whitewashed Radicals, how we sanitize our icons, and straight away it's loaded. Sure, I know what the word whitewash means in this context, covering or over sanitizing history, but to most people today, especially in his audience, the term instantly brings race into the conversation. It's kind of like saying the word goon to a Gen Zer. You might mean the bad guys from Lego Batman, but they're immediately going to think of the modern sexual connotation instead. This creation is exactly how that word will land with his viewers, and that choice of language shapes how they interpret the entire video before it even starts.
A symbol for perseverance in the fight for justice. Mainstream politicians today have no choice but to praise the man for his bravery and act as though they would have been on his side back in his day. But if history has shown us anything, it's that political moderates and status quo defenders are in favor of every human rights movement, except for the current one.
Okay, I mean, my guy can't even keep a straight face. It sounds like a powerful statement, but it is really just a sweeping generalisation. He's telling his audience not to trust moderates or compromise, and that only radicals care about justice. In other words, he's saying anything short of the extreme is framed as wrong. The problem is just not true at all. Radicals can push conversations forward, sure, but they're not the majority. Moderates and everyday people are. Take the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It would have never passed without moderate lawmakers and millions of ordinary citizens shifting their support for it. If moderates had all sat on their arse, change would never have happened. What this framing really does is divide the audience. It creates real fighters versus phony moderates, quote unquote, reinforcing the people who are already radical while nudging those who aren't yet into that mindset. It's manipulative and it's harmful for both groups of people.
Speaking of his politics, what were they? When Albert wasn't writing about mass energy equivalence or the serpentine shape of streams, he didn't shy away from expressing his dislike toward capitalism. He disliked the fact that the ruling class could often trace their power back to colonial conquest. Einstein was very critical of it all, and the solution he proposed was socialism. I'm convinced that there is one way to eliminate these grave evils, namely through the establishment of a socialist economy,
Firstly, I had to cut around a lot of irrelevant filler in this part of the video. Link to the full version is in the description if you want to see it. But notice how he starts reminding us how smart Einstein was. On the surface it's harmless, but the real purpose is clear. He's setting Einstein up as the ultimate authority to push the claim that socialism is the only way forward. The problem is, that's just not true. Einstein did criticise capitalism, mostly because of the Great Depression. In his essay, Why Socialism?, he outlined worries about inequality and monopolies, but in the very same essay, he warned that socialism could lead to an authoritarian dictatorship with people effectively enslaved. That doesn't sound like a devout socialist, it sounds like someone's brainstorming possibilities, not pledging allegiance to an ideology. This essay was more of a thought piece than a political programme. Einstein wasn't an economist or political theorist. Using his opinion to argue for socialism is like using Cristiano Ronaldo's diet to design economic policy, impressive in one field but completely irrelevant in another. And if we check our radicalization playbook, we can see the tactic clearly. He rewrites icons to fit his narrative by highlighting only Einstein's most extreme words and ignoring the nuance. He manipulates his audience into believing that smart people were all radicals, so if you're not, you're on the wrong side. That's not an argument, it's persuasion by authority, and it's one of the oldest tricks in the book.
In King's The Three Evils of Society speech, he said, "We must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. We are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism," he said in a 1966 speech in front of his staff.
"We will make his dream come true."
Yeah, that's great, man. Everyone should strive to uphold King's dream of equality and harmony, but we should also strive to uphold his ideas of economic reconstruction instead of pretending like they don't exist.
This is where the pattern really shows. I don't have an issue with calling MLK radical in some respects. He absolutely did challenge the status quo, and that's part of what made him really effective. But notice how Overzealots frames it. Instead of acknowledging MLK's full legacy, his message of unity, his non-violent methods, his ability to move moderates to his side, he zeroes in on one of MLK's harsher critiques of capitalism. It's not education, it's recruitment. By presenting MLK as one-dimensional, anti-capitalist, he's telling his audience, see, even your heroes are radical, if you're not, you're on the wrong side.
Nelson Mandela and his contributions toward dismantling apartheid in South Africa will often get brought up. Certain groups like to paint him as if he were opposed to violent resistance, and in some cases as if he were a full-blown pacifist. But that isn't true. Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, was the armed paramilitary wing of the ANC, co-founded by Mandela himself. Mandela grew increasingly in favor of anti-colonial armed resistance once it became clear to him that peaceful means of resisting simply weren't working.
Now again, this is technically true. Mandela was linked to armed resistance through the ANC's militant wing, but the problem here is how it's framed. Overzealots make it sound like Mandela's greatness came from being willing to pick up a gun as if that was the defining part of his life. But Mandela himself didn't see it that way. In later years, he openly said that violence was never the ideal solution and that reconciliation and unity were far more important. He regretted that violence had been part of the struggle at all, and his legacy today is built on moving away from that, not glorifying it. By reducing Mandela to a freedom fighter who took up arms, Overzealot strips away the part of his story that made him a global symbol, his ability to forgive, to negotiate and to lead South Africa into a future that could have easily spiraled into civil war. Once again, this is the playbook at work. Take a respected figure, highlight the most extreme part of their past, erase the nuance and repackage them as proof that radicalization is the only way forward.
Why is the mainstream narrative so eager to use these figures to serve its goals, yet when it comes time to acknowledge their radical politics, it suddenly can't be bothered? Acting extreme politicians today have no choice but to praise the man for his bravery and act as though they would have been on his side back in his day. Well, it pretends that they weren't actually all too radical, that they weren't a threat to the status quo, that they were at most liberals, akin to the American Democratic Party maybe. But this is a gross misrepresentation of history and a sanitization of the radical politics held by these beloved figures.
Now, this is a classic move. Anytime you want to push people toward the more extreme views, you frame the mainstream, the press, the politicians, the teachers, whoever, either as blind or actively hiding the real truth, quote unquote. It's powerful because it sets up a trap. If the mainstream agrees with you, it's proof you're right. But if they disagree, it's proof they're lying. Either way, the radical view wins by default because any counterpoint gets dismissed as propaganda. And here's the problem, the mainstream isn't some unified villain covering up all of history. Of course, they simplify legacies, all pop culture does. But rewriting history isn't unique to them, it's exactly what Overzealots is doing here, just in the opposite direction. He sanitizes by omission, cherry picks only the most radical moments, and then claims that the real truth is what the media is afraid to tell you. It's not about history, it's about steering his audience, and once you find the media is dishonest, your viewers have nowhere else to turn. They're locked in your perspective. That's the final step in the radicalization playbook. As we can see right here, once you distrust the media and all other sources of information, you become their primary source, as they believe they can only trust you, therefore radicalizing his viewers. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching, and I really do appreciate it. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe or a hate comment, I really don't mind. See you all in the next video.